Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to our latest programme on how Brexit is overshadowing the party conference season. Last week, Labour seemed to shift towards a people's vote, while this week the Tories split between Theresa May's Chequers Minus and Boris Johnson's Canada Plus. Consider then the SNP, who have not one but two referenda to grapple with, whether to support another one in Europe while promoting another one on Scottish independence. All of this while support for independence remains at a very high level, and crucially the activist base, as measured by the turnout at rallies, seems much more mobilised, even than in 2014. Today we ask some of the key players how the SNP should approach Brexit, either as an opportunity to promote independence or as an economic disaster to be avoided at all costs. But first, over to Tasmina with your tweets, your emails and your messages.
Now, we've had a great, if not in some cases, surprised response to Alex's interview with Edwina Currie last week. Old Granny says, I've just caught up with this episode and have to say that I'm amazed that I've agreed with Edwina Currie on many points. Although I loathe Thatcher, Currie is head and shoulders above the current Tories. Checker says, most politicians give me high blood pressure. Well, I know how you feel. But today in your show, simple, honest facts were offered with civility. During the eggs epidemic, I was busy at work, but today got the answers from Edwina. Carol says, I tape your show weekly and enjoyed this one so much I'll watch it again tonight. And I can pause to study her over-the-top but fascinating peacock decor more closely. Now, Edwina Currie has messaged back herself to explain her decor and says, this is in our jungle room. Mad batty place paid for by the proceeds of 2014. I'm a Celebrity, which of course Edwina was in. Which we keep, she says, for entertaining and special occasions. Hence the giraffe and the gorilla. No, I don't mean Alex Salmond, Edwina adds. Janet, who speaks about Alex's interview style, says Alex is counting on us, the audience, to use our own minds to decide what to think of these people and what they have to say. He respects our intelligence. That's big. I love his show. Well, thank you for watching, Janet. Jamie says, that was such a good show. Can't wait for the next one. So I hope you're watching this episode, Jamie. And finally, Paul says, an open and honest interview from a Tory for a change. Well, now back to Brexit. And we're delighted to be joined by Alex Neil, member of the Scottish Parliament for Airdrie and Shotts. He voted for Brexit in the 2016 referendum on the UK's membership of the EU.
I think you still think, despite voting for Brexit, that the European issue in its broadest sense is a big opportunity to push forward the independence cause.
Absolutely. We saw in the last referendum on independence how the European Union, in particular the President Barroso, actually used the power and the influence of the European Union to do down the whole case for Scottish independence. If you have Brexit, you don't have that. We've seen in Catalonia as well just what the real attitude is of the EU leadership towards any country within a state wanting independence. I mean, the way in which they backed up the Spanish government for its illegal activity, I think, is not a good omen for the EU being particularly pro-independence or even staying neutral.
So your policy would what be pro-EFTA, the European Free Trade Association?
Yeah, we've got to see the final deal to see what the options are, but certainly I think that the logical position as things stand at the moment for Scotland, for an independent Scotland, would be to be a member of EFTA and the European Economic Area. So that gives you the benefit of being in the European market without the downside of being in the customs union or in the agricultural policy or the fishing policy. Now, with any solution to this, it's not all one way, all good and all bad. But I think, on balance, that's a good way forward.
But wouldn't, as the Unionist parties would say, wouldn't that cause problems on the Scottish-English border? We saw how hard the government were working to stop a Northern Irish-style backstop for Scotland in the European negotiations. Wouldn't, in these circumstances, an independent Scotland EFTA, welcomed with open arms, certainly, but wouldn't there be difficulties in trade between Scotland and England?
Well, I think there need to be a deal between Scotland and England in terms of a UK single market. But the SNP's policy at the moment is if Brexit happens and Scotland becomes independent thereafter, our policy at the moment is to go back into the European Union. I think that would present far more problems than being members of EFTA and the European Economic Area. So it's a toss-up between what's the balance is. I mean, when it came to the Brexit vote, like most people, I'm not a Boris Johnson who's ideologically one way, and I'm not an ideological Remainer the other way. I think it was a balance for most folk, and recent research has shown in Scotland, for example, over 60% of the population in Scotland describe themselves as Eurosceptic. That means at least a third of the people who describe themselves as Eurosceptic voted Remain. They're not ideologically attached to the European Union.
But wouldn't it be still an anomaly? I mean, you just describe yourself by implication as Eurosceptic. But in an EFTA-type style arrangement like Iceland, Norway, Switzerland and Liechtenstein, you'd have free access to the European market of hundreds of millions of people, but you might find yourself with questions still to be resolved of the Scotland-England market.
Well, of course, there are differences. I mean, obviously, Switzerland has got a completely different arrangement, and there are variations in terms of what the deal can be. I don't think you can be absolutely prescriptive until we see what the UK deal ends up being. But what I'm saying is that certainly at the moment, it looks to me much more logical for an independent Scotland to join EFTA and the European Economic Area rather than go back into the European Union. And I don't believe if we go back into the European Union, we would get away with not adopting the euro. And I think the euro would be a disaster for the Scottish economy.
So which currency was your EFTA-orientated Scotland have?
Well, my view is when Scotland becomes independent, we should move towards a separate Scottish currency. And I think listening to the former Greek finance minister who's written on this stuff and who I think his experience is very useful for the Scots, where he's basically saying he would support Scottish independence on one condition, and that is that we have our own currency.
Well, of course, Iceland has its own currency, Norway has its own currency, Switzerland has its own currency, and Liechtenstein, well, I think it uses both the euro and the Swiss franc.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about all of these countries is that the standard of living per head is far, far higher in each and every one of those countries than it is in Scotland or indeed in the UK.
Now, timescale for independence. I'm about to interview Angus MacNeil, who caused a big stir by saying, by next March, let's have a referendum on Scottish independence. Do you see the urgency that Angus MacNeil sees, or are you more cautious like the party leadership?
Well, my view is that the quicker we get independence, the better, because if you look at the condition of the Scottish economy and the challenges coming down the road with the artificial intelligence and all the rest of it, and looking at the experience of the countries you've just mentioned, Iceland being a very good example of where small countries have the ability and the agility to respond to global economic factors to their own benefit. So the quicker we get independence, the better. I think realistically, in terms of winning the independence referendum, I know Angus has said that it will happen next March. I unfortunately think that that's not probably going to happen, apart from anything else that requires legislation that will take longer than 6 months to get through. But the important point is that once we know the deal between the UK and the EU, then I think we then need to map out very clearly a way forward as quickly as possible towards achieving independence. We need independence as urgently as possible so that we can get Scotland back up to the top echelons of economic performance and realise the benefits of our own resources for our own people. And not only that, irrespective of whether you're for or against Brexit, I think the one thing we're all agreed upon is that Theresa May and her merry band of men and women in the Tory party have shown how not to run a country. Not only could we run our own country better than them, we can actually run England better than them.
An interesting thought, Alec. Can I ask you lastly, I mean, some people are against a second referendum either on Europe or on Scotland. Some people are for both. There are some people who want the second independence referendum on Europe, but not in Scotland, like the Liberals, for example. But you want another referendum in Scotland, but not one in Europe. How do you think the SNP Conference is going to address these two referenda?
Once people have taken the decision to change, in this case, to vote for Brexit. It's very difficult then democratically to argue, unless you said before the referendum that once the deal was done there would be a confirmatory referendum. That wasn't said. Everybody said that was the final decision and that was the basis on which people voted. Therefore, I also think there are practical problems. For example, it would take another year to have a Brexit referendum because you need 6 months for the legislation. You then, under the rules, need 6 months for campaigning. I don't think the country, whether we're talking about Scotland or the UK, would really want another year of the mayhem we've seen with the way the Tories have conducted this.
And the SNP Conference next week, are they going to be champing at the bit for another go at the independence issue?
Well, I think everybody in the SNP is champing at the bit for an early referendum as early as possible, but I think there's a debate in the party about just exactly when the timing is.
Thank you very much, Alec Neil. Now, Alec Neil, as we've heard, is one of the few leading SNP politicians who voted for Brexit. But now he's taking more or less common cause with pro-European MP Angus MacNeil in calling for urgency in seizing the independence moment. I caught up with Angus earlier, speaking from Barra in his Hebridean constituency. You caused quite a stir in the run-up to conference by putting a very short timescale on the next independence referendum. You were calling for it by next March. What was the logic in choosing that date?
Well, it's predicated on the fact that, or the possibility of having no deal. And I think if we have no deal, the Scottish Government has to be ready with some life jacket, some lifeboat, some life raft or other to get us out of the sinking ship that is the UK. Theresa May is headed for the rocks, the iceberg, or wherever else she can slam into. And it's always good practice to be prepared and to have at least some sort of emergency drill waiting in the wings so that we aren't taken down with them. And of course, if she gets no deal, that's us out on the 29th of March. If she gets a deal, it maybe complicates things a little because she might limp on to December 2020.
Now, we saw at the Labour conference in Liverpool last week a step towards a people's vote on Europe. Do you think at the SNP conference there'll be a step towards a second independence referendum?
Labour, it has to be noted, we're playing policy roulette with the policy changing hourly and according to personnel and probably changing every day too. So there's nothing fixed about what is called the People's Referendum as regards the European Union.
Now, Angus MacNeil, you chair the International Trade Committee of the House of Commons, the Select Committee. Are you not getting a bit frustrated that after producing report after report warning of the dire consequences of a no-deal Brexit or a bad deal Brexit, your colleagues seem to be ignoring all your reports?
It is indeed very frustrating because people are living in a wishful fantasy world. I mean, if we just take one example, the GDP gain from a deal with the United States of America. And remember, the United States of America is a quarter of the world's GDP. The GDP gain there is only 0.2%. That versus the 6% or the 8% I mentioned earlier, that's a 30th or a 40th of the damage they're going to do. That means that the UK has to find itself 30 such USA free trade deals. Now, if it's a quarter of the world's GDP, we're going to need 8 to 12 planets for the UK to make up its loss in GDP with its nearest large trading bloc, which is, of course, the European Union.
Now, Angus, you're an experienced parliamentarian at Westminster, an aspirant statesman, as the Speaker of the House of Commons likes to call you. What's your assessment of what's going to happen in the crunch votes on Brexit this autumn?
The first way of looking at it is you vote for the option of least damage. The other option is, of course, they're both very damaging and you want to get back to a situation where you're not being stuck with least damage, but you reach out for what is a better scenario, and that is being in the customs union and the single market. Both are required, incidentally. Labour haven't grasped that. Or, of course, just retaining membership of the European Union. And I think the type of transition deal that Theresa May is looking for is something between 200 and 300 years for the UK to get its house in order.
Finally, Angus MacNeil, what's going to be your advice to your colleagues in Parliament and indeed to the SNP in general about how they should react to whatever deal Theresa May comes back with from Brussels?
And the advice is obvious. The advice has to be get yourselves on a footing for the independence referendum. Use the mandate that the Scottish Government has due to the Euro referendum of 2016. And remember, David Cameron stomped all over the Scottish election by insisting he held his European referendum over that same campaign period. We didn't like it at the time, but the advantage it has given us now is we got a clear mandate at the time, knowing what was coming down the line. There is nothing abstract about that mandate. It's a very concrete mandate, and it should be used. And I think the opportunity and the time is coming very soon.
Angus Brendan McNeill from the beautiful island of Barra. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, calls to advance the independence agenda from both sides of the European debate. Join us after the break as we make the comparison between Scotland and Catalonia, the two restless nations in the European firmament. Welcome back. One of the fascinating contrasts between Scotland and Catalonia is that while Scotland secured an independence process in 2014, the people's demonstrations in Catalonia, a nation denied a route to self-determination, were much, much larger. The Catalonian National Day regularly attracts more than 1 million people onto the streets of Barcelona. In Scotland, even in the run-up to the independence vote of 2014, 30,000 was considered a large crowd. However, are things changing now? I asked Martin Hannon, a journalist with a national newspaper who'd been covering the All Under One banner marches up and down Scotland, what crowd they were expecting in Edinburgh for the march and rally on Saturday. Martin Hannon, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. So tell me a bit about the marches that have been happening up and down the country under the banner, All Under One banner. Where have they been and how many people have been attending them?
It's been going for a couple of years, but it's this year that this phenomenon has taken off, which started in May in Glasgow, when around about somewhere between 55 and 60,000 people marched through the city. It took everybody by surprise, including the organisers. Nobody realised so many people would turn out for that march and rally. It was an incredible success, and it kicked on from there. The original idea was to go around the country. So, for instance, they've been to Dumfries, where there were 10,000 people in a tiny town, which actually voted no in the referendum.
So that must have been quite a surprise to have such a large number in that part of the country.
Absolutely, but a lot of people travelled down there. There were a lot of local people involved, and then it carried on to the other venues have been Stirling, Inverness, Dundee, where 16,000 people turned out, and now we're looking forward to next Saturday and Edinburgh, when there will be a march and rally down the Royal Mile, and it will be quite spectacular. The estimates at the moment are anywhere between 30 and 50,000 people.
What part do you think marches play in the independence movement?
It's a reminder to people that they are not alone in their campaign for independence, and that's very important. People are seeing on the ground that there is a network now growing right across the country, and it's growing by the day. And I dare say that if we'd had something like this in 2013, shall we say, then I think the result would have been different. I think it would have been a yes vote, and I'm very confident that these marches and what else is happening in the yes movement at the moment will build steadily towards the next independence referendum, whenever that may be, and the people will be ready to go to campaign and to win independence for Scotland, which is long overdue.
Martin Hannon, journalist for the National Newspaper, thank you very much indeed for your insight.
You're more than welcome, Tasmina.
I'm now absolutely delighted to be joined from Catalonia by Elisenda Pelusi, the President of the Catalan National Assembly. Elisenda, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. It's lovely to see you again. Clearly feelings are still high in Barcelona and of course across Catalonia. And indeed this week in Scotland there's going to be another march in Edinburgh that you may have heard of. I'm keen to take an understanding from you of what you think the importance of marches are to an independence movement, wherever it might be, in Catalonia or indeed in Scotland.
I think it is very important. It shows the mobilization of people, and it shows that these demands come from grassroots. No, they are not. It's people that have their political objectives, and they are willing to demonstrate. They are willing to organize things. They are willing to organize all sorts of events. And they are participating. They are politically active citizens.
Well, Elisenda, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for your time. Wishing you all the very best indeed. Elisenda Pelusi, the President of the Catalan National Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thanks and good luck in your march in Edinburgh.
Thank you very much. Now to discuss in detail the contrast between Scottish and Catalonian politics and their campaigns for independence, Alex is joined by former presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament, Tricia Marwick, and Catalonian government representative to the UK, Sergi Marcin.
Well, Sergi, Tricia, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sergi, it's almost a year to the day since the referendum, the unofficial referendum in Catalonia. How have things moved on since then?
It's a difficult moment because we have people in prison. As you know, we have members of the parliament that in this moment are in charge with sedition. That is a really strong charge because it's 30 years of prison for all of them. It's a difficult situation for the politicians and the society in this moment in Catalonia.
Tricia Marwick, as a former presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament, you've been an observer of the Catalonian situation, the referendum, the elections, and a frequent visitor to Catalonia. What's your assessment of the situation?
I seem to spend a lot of my time in Catalonia over the last year. I think things are extremely difficult. I think it's difficult for the political parties to keep the momentum going. And I think it's difficult for the civic society who want the process to be even quicker. And I think, you know, there's a bit of pragmatism and a bit of romanticism that are clashing at the moment.
If Quim Torra is leading Catalonia as an independent, does that mean there could be a potential role for you as an independent politician now?
I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back. I've done my bit in politics. But I do think it is interesting because Carme Forcadell, who was the president of the Catalan Parliament, is in jail at this moment without trial on charges that she allowed debate to take place in the Parliament.
Yeah, that's a dramatic thing. I mean, especially for a former presiding officer, or perhaps if we go back in history for former speakers of the House of Commons, it's the reason they get dragged to the chair is that they ended up in the tower for doing the wrong thing. But, you know, this is the 21st century. You wouldn't expect a presiding officer or a speaker to be jailed for allowing the parliamentarians to debate what they wanted to debate.
The duty of a president or a presiding officer or indeed a speaker is to make sure that debate happens in their parliament. That is what they are there to do, to make sure that all of the voices are heard.
But Tricia Marwick, you were the presiding officer when I was the First Minister, and an agreement was made between Scotland and London to have a process by which an independence referendum could be legally held. Do you see any prospect of an Edinburgh-type agreement coming to pass in Catalonia?
I think we've got to hope it is. And the only way that that is going to come about is pressure externally on Spain to allow it to happen. It is the Spanish government that have stopped such an agreement because they claim that it's against the constitution even to discuss the matter of Catalan independence or indeed any other independence. So I think the pressure has got to be on Spain to concede because you can see every day of the week, but particularly at this time with the Diada, the National Day a few weeks ago, the events surrounding the anniversary of the 1st of October last year, the determination of the people of Catalonia that their voice is going to be heard.
Sergi, the new socialist government in Madrid, I mean, they've started at least a dialogue with Catalonian leadership. Do you have any hope that that dialogue is going to lead to a substantial change?
We are a really young democracy, and we are coming from 40 years of dictatorship Franco. And some of the infrastructures of these dictatorships come to the democracy, and we haven't changed some of these powers. So I think that Spain is a great country, and I think that needs some help to understand what democracy is.
You must have been disappointed there if you were looking for outside intervention to help the Madrid government come to terms with self-determination and ballot box determination. The response of Europe to Catalonia was pretty poor. One or two voices supportive, but basically the institutions of Europe hostile to Catalonian ambitions.
Well, it's true that from the executive power, we didn't have any supports. But it's important to remark that from justice, for the rest of Justice for Europe, we have received some messages saying that the things that they are doing or running in Spain are not good.
You're talking here about the politicians who were in exile in the case, of course, of the former president in Germany, Carla Ponsati, in Scotland and others, that various jurisdictions didn't seem to want to hand them back to Spain.
The thing is that the Catalan movement is really peaceful, and if you are peaceful, it's impossible that you have charged for rebellion.
Trishama, one final question to you, and it's really about demonstrations, because you must have noticed when we were going through the independence process in Scotland, I think the biggest demonstration was about 40,000 people in Edinburgh. Now, that's big in Scottish terms, but in Catalonia, they can turn a million people into the streets of Barcelona at the drop of a hat. And now, interestingly enough, it seems that demonstrations, perhaps the one this coming Saturday in Scotland, are getting bigger when we don't have an independence process. Do you have an answer to that phenomena?
There has been a tradition going back 30, 40, maybe more years of the Catalonian people coming out in the streets. Very, very strong civic organisations as well as the political organisations.
What do you attribute to the rising numbers now demonstrating in Scotland?
I think there's a desire for the process of independence to be moved forward by many people. I think they see that as a way to put pressure on everybody involved to say, there is a case for this, we want it, we need to move quicker. The ultimate decision is going to be, you know, when that process, is it going to be just after Brexit? Is it going to be afterwards? Because, of course, there is also a political mandate for it.
Tricia and Sergey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In contrast to the other major parties, the SNP is largely united on Europe. They are against Brexit and believe that the Tory and Labour plans for dealing with the European Union are doomed to failure. The debate in the SNP is rather concentrated on how quickly to push forward on another independence referendum. The activist base is champing at the bit, but the leadership is more cautious, fearing that a second defeat could finish the cause for the foreseeable future. From two ends of the European debate, Alex Neil and Angus MacNeil now unite to press for urgency in addressing the independence test. They are moved by the thought that the Westminster establishment has never been weaker, while the European future for Scotland, whether it be in the European Union or EFTA, would never be easier to negotiate. One thing is for certain. When the All Under One banner rally takes place this Saturday in Edinburgh, and the crowd are asked in the time-honoured fashion, what do they want? The answer will be independence. And the answer on timescale will be now. Thank you for watching. And from Alex, myself and all at the show, we'll see you next week.